we're so glad to see you here and glad to be here in the spirit of Louis Armstrong and to be with the wonderful people to my left. I'm going to say a few words and then introduce each one of the panelists, and then we'll go one after another with a minimum of introduction at that point. And then we'll talk among ourselves, and then there'll also be time for Q&A with the audience. Each one will make a brief statement, 20 minutes or so, and then we'll move on and round up just as I've said. I'm Robert O'Mealy from the Center for Jazz Studies and from the board of the Louis Armstrong Educational Foundation. And it's important to me to acknowledge that board. It's our 50th anniversary, and it's a wonderful partnership that Columbia has had with the members of our board. Jackie Harris is here. David Shevin is here. Are there other board members in the house at the moment? Robin Bell Stevens, of course, is here. Art Thompson, all of you. Would you mind just standing up for just 1 second and let us acknowledge you as just the heroes of this story? Thank you so much. Some of you know that Armstrong set up the board to make sure that jazz education continued at a certain level. And he's been a wonderful supporter of us at Columbia and of others that are so important, including Jazzmobile and others I could name. So I'm here representing that board and also the Center for Jazz Studies here at Columbia. And we are all here, the ones I've named, because Mr. Armstrong established this foundation to support the music that would not have been possible without his stellar example. Our theme for the second annual Armstrong Continuum is Armstrong the Traveler, the man on the move. Tonight's special focus will be Armstrong's music in a time of emergency. So we have asked 4 exceedingly brilliant people to take 20 million, that would be you, bro, and the others, to take 20 minutes to tell us, what do we do now? What does Armstrong's music suggest? Ralph Ellison's character in Invisible Man hears an Armstrong recording, What Did I Do to Be So Black and Blue? And he says to himself, this familiar music demanded action. And so the question for tonight is, what is the action that the music demands? And Armstrong in particular, what is he telling us at this difficult point? Amiri Baraka said that you could hear in the texture of Armstrong's sound, in the timbre of his music, was an imperative. What was he telling us that we should do at a time like this? He called it a call to action. Some of the hints of what he might have wanted to tell us came through in the earlier panels today, when people talked about intensity and extreme courage and honesty. He talked about a conscientiousness, a nakedness of spirit, they said. Subversiveness at times. Dick Hyman said that a few days ago, he saw on television a show about space travel with a 1920s Armstrong piece as the soundtrack, and it was just right. Somehow the music was so fresh, he said. And he said also that it was heroic in a way that fit that music just right. It was noble. It was both modest and noble, he said. So these are some of the hints as to what it is that we're going to be about. As I said, I'm going to try to be very brief with my introductions of the speakers so we can get down to business. Michelle Miller with the beautiful hat is somebody that we've all seen on TV. She's a nationally celebrated correspondent for CBS News who currently serves as co-host on the Saturday edition of CBS This Morning. She's also served as a substitute anchor on the CBS Evening News weekend editions and CBS News Up to the Minute. Born in Los Angeles, California, Ms. Miller earned a Bachelor's of Arts degree in journalism from Howard University and holds an MA an MS degree in urban studies from the University of New Orleans. From 1994 to 2003, Ms. Miller lived in New Orleans and worked as a reporter and anchor for WWL-TV, the CBS affiliate. For 3 of those years, her broadcast called The Early Edition was the highest rated newscast in its time slot across the nation.
You can stop there.
One more thing. Also, between 1998 and 2001, Ms. Miller taught communications and broadcast journalism at Dillard University. So she brings a wealth of talent and experience to this panel indeed, and she'll speak first. Mark Thompson is the Reverend Mark Thompson. He's a journalist, TV host, and a drummer.
Uh-oh.
A what?
Oh, no, I'm sorry. Let me fix this
Yeah, I'm
up.
not a drummer.
That's what it said. He's played, no?
No, I don't play.
He is not a drummer.
No. No,
After attending the University of North Carolina,
no, that's not me either. You know, that's not, I didn't go to North
got the
Carolina.
wrong one.
You got the wrong Mark Thompson.
I'll be damned. Oh, that's terrible.
There's more than one Mark Thompson. Mark Thompson's also the head of the New York Times. I get mistaken for him a lot.
He's a city councilman in Los Angeles.
Right, it's a lot of Mark Thompson
Yeah, there-
out here.
Take a moment and introduce yourself. This is embarrassing enough, but let's do that.
Well, why don't we introduce everybody? So when I make my remarks, I'll say a little bit about myself,
All right,
and then
okay, well,
we can go there. There's no problem.
Uh-oh.
But I'm Mark. I'm happy to be here. Good to see everybody.
Oh, my goodness. Lord have mercy. Well, that's what you get
I
when
love
you
a mistake. I love a mistake. It just
yeah.
breaks all of that formality.
That's
Well,
right.
some
Break
of
down the
us just
formality.
start and not have any more introduction.
No, please.
No, okay. Well, I'll tell you what we're going to. Well,
Don't be embarrassed. Take it on.
Okay,
Go
we're
on to
gonna take
Mr.
it on.
Marsalis.
Winton
You don't even have to introduce
Learson
I
Marsalis.
want to hear about it. I know almost
That's
everybody
Winton,
here.
everybody. That's Winton.
Look, I know almost everybody sitting here. How y'all doing?
Yeah, that's right. We all know
You
when.
can be introduced to them.
Well, I'll tell a story about Winton that you all know who he is without my listing the Grammys and so on like that. He played Columbia in 2001 or maybe year 2000, a program honoring Armstrong, and there were a lot of details to take care of after the concert was over, and where were the car and the this and the that, and would he go to meet the president and so forth and so on. And while we were standing backstage, there was a boy who was about 10 years old who came up and said, "Winton?" And he stopped in his tracks and looked at the boy and recognized him, and he said, "Did you bring your horn?" And he said, "Yeah, I've got it right here." He said, "Well, take your horn out." And he wasn't going to talk to me. I'm trying to talk business and this and that. He had all the time in the world for this 10-year-old boy. He remembered last time we met, you were doing C, G, and F. Let me hear you do G. Right now? Yeah, pull your horn out. And we had a music lesson by one of the greatest jazz musicians in the world that was all about this 10-year-old boy. And the kind of generosity and kindness that he shows everywhere he goes matches the virtuosity that he shows every time he picks up his horn. So we're very glad to have that man here.
Thank you.
And Reverend Forbes is a great man as well. I'm not going to look down and walk. Who knows what will be on my paper. But I know that man. I attended his church, Riverside Church, for many, many years. And I would never miss a Sunday if I could help it. And very often on the way out, I would buy or wait a little bit, and you can get a tape of the sermon Sunday by Sunday. So you could hear that sermon all the rest of the week and maybe all the rest of your life. There was always something more than you came for, and always something to take notes on and to go back and study. One of my sons said to me when he was about, I don't know, he must have been about 6 years old, he said, "I still don't know if I believe in God, but I believe in Reverend Forbes. I know I believe in something." And I said, "You know, that might be good enough for me. You got an example to live by." He also, another brief story. One of my sons was doing a confirmation class, and we were coming after service through, And he was a knucklehead, Douglas, that boy. And he had said, the only thing the class has confirmed for me is unbelief. That's all I have from the class. And I told Reverend Forbes this, and I said, what are we going to do? He went to the class, and all he's got is unbelief. And Reverend Forbes said, what have you been reading to get this unbelief thing? And I don't remember what it was. Douglas was reading Dostoevsky, or he was reading whatever he was reading. And Douglas and Reverend Forbes said, you know, you're engaging with this thing in a way that's what we ask more than we ask anything else. So we're going to confirm you next Sunday when the other children get up. And we're more confident in you than we are in many of the others who come through. So this is a very, very, very special seer and very special leader of the entire community. And so welcome to you, sir, for being here. We'll start with this with Michelle, and apologies again.
Oh, you want me to start?
Yes.
You'd like for me to start right now?
You can start.
So
right
I'm going to start off by saying I'm a layperson on this panel, and I really should not be up here. But for the fact that I was a fan of Louis Armstrong. I was the First Lady of New Orleans. You left that out. And I was essentially married to the man who looked at Louis Armstrong as a hero. I'm from Los Angeles, California, and I married a guy who essentially enabled or made it so that New Orleans named the airport after Louis Armstrong under great duress.
That's right.
You have to understand this. Because there were agencies within that culture that thought it wasn't appropriate. And I want you to understand that Louis Armstrong is a GOAT, a greatest of all time. He is synonymous with the city of New Orleans. He is the person, when you say, I'm from Louisiana, they say, what? I come from the city of New Orleans. Louis Armstrong. Everywhere I've been into the world, everywhere that I have gone throughout this world, I say I'm from New Orleans, they say home of Louis Armstrong. So it's interesting as an observer, this child from Los Angeles who was a movie buff by the age of 7, film noir from the 30s to 40s war scenes to the 50s, 60s, 70s. I had seen it all, not music, but an appreciation for the musical in film. And my impression of Louis Armstrong, and again, as this, coming through an observer's lens, was that he was, like so many people forced into a time, who could only be part of who he was, the mask that we are still now wearing as African Americans. Now, I'm going to be short here because they have far more educated points of view than my lay observations. But this man, when I moved to New Orleans in 1994, understand, this is, 10 years before Katrina. Most people's impression of New Orleans was what? Think about it. Think of what you thought New Orleans was, right? You thought it was a city of gumbo, right? Of cohesion, of cultural inclusion. All of this marriage of peoples from all over the planet, cultures from all over the planet, really coalescing in a way that created this wonderful gumbo, right? When I moved to New Orleans, being that I'm from South Central Los Angeles, I immediately identified with what it was. It was a 75 to 80% black city at that time. It was a 70%, 60 to 70% town living below the poverty rate. It was a town that was the #1 city for murder.
For crimes, yeah.
For crime. And it was also a very segregated city. And so I imagined Louis Armstrong coming being born into New Orleans as almost a century before. And I thought to myself, here's this orphan who, you know, wanted to make something of himself. And in making himself something, had to leave New Orleans. Couldn't have made it there because jazz was too big.
Well, then yeah.
Back then. It wasn't considered true or appropriate or
It was a stroke.
classy music, you know. But I think about that, and I think about that song, Do You Know What It Means to Miss New Orleans? And this is a man who Jet Magazine had called an Uncle Tom. A man who called Josephine Baker's stance, you know, against bigotry in New York City. He was aghast by her stirring the pot in 1951, I think it was. But I think about that song, Do You Know What It Means to Miss New Orleans? And like that, I knew what he was talking about, or at least I thought I did. And what he was talking about was, to me, you would know better, I'm sure you too, but this is my interpretation. How I miss my city, how I love my city, but how I cannot appreciate my city, but in the missing of it, in the nostalgia of it, in the not being there, in the missing. All this wondrous soul, because I can't really appreciate all of those things that it is as a man of color. And so I fast forward today, I think about, and we haven't really set this up. Maybe we did in the earlier forum. Are we talking about 57? Have we discussed that? We have. I wasn't here. But you talked about Larry Lebanon and you talked about his article. Because I think this really is, are you all familiar? Come on, talk back to me really quickly. So we know what this is. We know that, you know, Louis said, he put his foot down, right? And in quoting Larry Lebanon, this young jazz enthusiast who was also a first-time writer in Little Rock, Arkansas, he goes backstage and has a moment with this man, right? And this man says, who's known as the Uncle Tom of the era, it's getting almost so bad a colored man, hasn't got any country. President Eisenhower was two-faced and had no guts. He called them an expletive, but it was saturated, or at least cleaned up. You know, can you imagine a man who all of a sudden came to a consciousness in the moment with the Cold War going on, and he's supposed to be going over to the Soviet Union, and he's supposed to be giving a good old talking to these people who don't believe in freedom, don't believe in civil liberties, don't believe in civil rights. And I say that because a person like Louis Armstrong was an iconic cultural, he was a celebrity who people listened to one way or another. One moment, mainstream America, the next moment, you know, all of Black America because of that stand. And you think about what it takes to make a stand like that. You look at what happened to a Colin Kaepernick, who didn't even launch his career, not really, in taking a stand to say that Black Lives Matter. And then you look at just a few days ago, LeBron James taking another stand in support of what appears to be in support of the Chinese government against Hong Kong. And you look at these two juxtapositions, almost what? Now 70 years apart. And you look at what that means. A man who's an orphan, who's probably made a good living. I'm sure he was at some point a millionaire. I don't know. You tell me.
He struggled.
You know,
He
and
made
his
it.
livelihood depended upon the support of a lot of people. And then you look at what has taken place with a man of $450 million. I'm not making a judgment. I'm an observer. But there is a state of emergency going on right now. That is clear. Over the last 6 years, this nation has been through a series of how would you describe it? How would you describe it? I'm curious.
Events.
There are a lot of things going on. I love to hear.
Catastrophes.
Right, from the shooting of Michael Brown and the one police shooting after another, to the gun violence and mass shootings that have taken place, to the political climate that we are now living in. All of these things.
A sanctioned absence of morality.
Mm-hmm.
She said it, a sanctioned absence of morality.
Yeah.
So clearly, the three of you were going to come up with the action. I was just stating the case.
Okay. I don't know what the action.
Good evening, everyone.
Who are you?
My name is Mark Thompson. I am not a drummer. I think I pretend I can sing. Now, the thing about being a preacher is Dr. Forbes knows that when you're preaching in the pulpit, you can sing, nobody can stop you, you know, so we get away with that a lot. But very glad to be here with you. My bio is actually in the book, if you have it. I would only want to highlight, because I agree with Michelle, I don't know that I'm really qualified to be here either, from at least the music perspective. All of my life I've been a political activist, a civil rights activist. But I can say, and I do want to thank Jackie, I want to thank you for
Big thanks to Jackie.
inviting me. I want to acknowledge her. I would like to acknowledge all the other panelists and all the great work that Michelle does for us as a journalist and representing us. Give her another round of applause, if you would, please. Dr. Forbes is one of my fathers in ministry. There's something else you can know about me, and we all have a profound amount of respect for him. I presume everyone knows he had Dr. King's job. Mm-hmm. Dr. King's dream was to come here and be on the faculty and teach and pastor Riverside. Yep. But God called him to do something else in Montgomery. He resisted at first, but he went on ahead and did it, and we're all thankful for it. So it's good to see you, man, and all that you represent. And also this brother here whose name is so powerful to all of us. He has single-handedly, and I'm going to get into this in terms of Louis Armstrong, because he picked up the baton. Winton has single-handedly kept a major part of our culture alive. And that's part of the emergency. Where are we as black people? Where is our culture? Is it appreciated, or is it just gonna die? And jazz is not dead because of what Winton has done. Now, he's been holding up, no, you can please. He's been, aside from the artists that he curates, I'm afraid to say, You know, a lot of us could do a lot more to support him. And I'm going to get into that in terms of some action items. But I think the only other things that qualify me to be here is kind of some coincidences going on tonight. I grew up in Nashville. I was raised on the campus of Fisk University where my mother worked for about 30 years. And from the time I was a little boy, I'd learned that Louis Armstrong's first wife got her degree in music from Fisk. In, I think, 1901 or something like that. The important thing about that is Nashville is known today as Music City because of country music, but that's not how it originally got its name. When the Fisk Jubilee Singers went to perform for Queen Victoria, she named Nashville Music City. And then later on, that kind of got lost. And as country music came to popularity, it kind of took over the name. So again, another one of those pieces of culture that is often expropriated from African people. But I was very fortunate to grow up in that environment. And so when people would come to campus and visit, famous people, when I was a little boy, I'd get to touch the hem of their garment. I literally met U.B. Blake, believe it or not. I must have been about 7 or 8 years old. When Miles Davis would come, I would all this. So I got an early acclimation to the music, and all of my friends called me an old soul because I like jazz so much. Man, when you listen to that jazz, you know, I liked everything else too. I remember when the Sugar Hill Gang first came out.
Yes.
But I still appreciated the music. So when I was 13, I saved up all my allowance and decided I was going to collect jazz. And I went to the record store because we still had LPs in. Yeah, I'm that old. And I know it doesn't look like it because I don't have any gray hair. But the first thing I did and I know Wendell will give me an A for doing this. The first thing I did was go out and buy just about everything Duke Ellington recorded because I figured that was a good place to start. Then I moved on and collected Charlie Parker and Billie Holiday and then Louis Armstrong. And it was then when I really began to study and understand Louis Armstrong, just how revolutionary he was and what he actually did. I wasn't really clear at first as to where it all began. But I began to read about him and understand that the most revolutionary thing that he did was change music forever. And, you know, if you go back and you listen to the way music was performed and the way songs were sung, coming out of the classical genre, everything was very rote, to the point, no delineation from what was on the paper, the note, even singing. You listen to vocalists back then, it was in mono, of course, unfortunately, and everybody's just straight. But Louis literally changed singing. We sing the way we do right now because of Louis Armstrong. And it struck me because, I would hear and see some of the things that people were very, very critical of him. They thought that he didn't always take the right stances, and they thought even his appearance at times harkened back to a day of minstrelsy, to be frank about it. But I never saw it like that. I always gave him a chance and wanted to understand what he was doing and what his accomplishment was. So I've always thought about it this way, that at the time he revolutionized music, that was in the time that it was. Mm-hmm. But if we look at each generation of those who changed and all the different forms that black music has taken, if Louis Armstrong had been born in either one of those generations, he probably would have done the same thing. So if he was born our generation, Louis Armstrong probably would have been the greatest hip-hop artist. He probably would have innovated hip-hop in some type of way. If he had been born before that, he might have been a Motown artist and been great and innovative in that way. But he was revolutionary in the time that he was. And that's why I think it's important. One of my other mentors, Dr. John Henry Clark, used to always talk about the African continuum and how our history and our culture is in a circle, not a straight line. And so what he contributed is still something that we can use and learn from today. I think it's also important to note that he lived his life at a time when some of the greatest change was going on in this country. If you think about the time he was born, the generation that had survived the Civil War, some of them were still alive. He lived through the era of lynching and segregation and Jim Crow and desegregation. All of that, he saw that, and yet he still strove for excellence. He represented that generation of our people that no matter what it was we were facing, they always did their very best to represent us and to change. And so even later on, when other artists would say, well, Lewis is still stuck in the old ways, but they say that about every artist. White artists say that. When Elvis came along, they said Sinatra was stuck in the old ways. But Sinatra learned how to sing from Louis Armstrong. So that's the nature of music. There'll always be some new music. I don't know what the next music will be, but someday there will be something to come along to make the music we listen to today obsolete. But jazz, to me, is the Rosetta Stone. It is that which is sacred, because more than any other music, because of the way it is performed, because of the way we hear it, I think represents a revolutionary change and action on our part. Everybody having a solo, but yet still being a part of the collective. Everyone taking a melody that heretofore, before Lewis, we just played the melody, that's it. But then able to improvise on it and still not lose the melody, and able to do it a different way every single time. That, to me, is part of the spirit of our culture. And make no mistake about it, if we do a deep dive, and I know, Wynn can do this with his eyes closed, we can talk about the role and the presence of African culture in New Orleans. Everything, every piece of music that we created and developed came with us to these shores. And we changed it. So whether it be gospel, the blues, or even before that, the work songs on the plantation, that was all a part of us. I'll pause here, and I guess we'll have a larger discussion. I should mention, too, speaking of my mother, God bless her soul, today would have been her 75th birthday. So I'm glad to bring her up, and I'm thankful for what she taught me. Literally, I was reading a few years ago Thomas Brothers' book on Louis Armstrong and modernism, and he tells a story which I'm sure some of you know, and this is how I know Louis, if he was around in our generation, he just would have been a hip-hop artist, because he had had an encounter with the police in Memphis in the 30s, and I think that's when he was accused of sitting too close to his manager's white wife. And they performed in a hall, and the police were there. They had arrested Louis Armstrong and some of the band, but they let him out to perform in this hall in Memphis. So Louis says, we're going to dedicate this song, the next song, to the police. And the song he dedicated and sang was, I'll be glad when you dead, you rascal you. Now he's singing, and the police didn't get it. And the way he sang and the way his voice sounded and his inflection, they literally, and his accent, they literally couldn't understand the words. And they said, oh, we thank you so much for singing that song to us. They were none the wiser. But look,
Ode.
I'll be glad when you dead, you rascal you. I mean, NWA, F the police. So the point I'm making is that I think that if he were still with us today, and his spirit still is, we aren't African people, he would want us to act in this time of emergency and read between the lines. What did I do to be so black and blue? What did he do when he stood up to Eisenhower? And it's also kind of ironic that when he did that, he didn't go to the Soviet Union. And now look at what we have right now. We are under a regime in this country of someone who represents the former Soviet Union. And years ago, Louis said, well, I'm not going to go to the Soviet Union. But that is the emergency. Lastly, I'll just say at this moment, today on my radio show, I interviewed Ben Crump, the attorney who represented Trayvon Martin's family and Michael Brown's family, and is now getting involved in the Tatiana Jefferson case we all know that just occurred in Texas the other day. In fact, he left me to go see Gail. I think you all going to air him in the morning.
He has a new book, too.
Yeah, the book is called Open Season, the legalized genocide of people of color. And they're going to replicate what Robeson and Du Bois did and go back to the United Nations and raise the issue of genocide. But, you know, I'd like to think that if Louis Armstrong was alive today, with all of the backwardness that we're in, what Michelle described, and the words that you all used, what was it, the word?
Sanctioned morality.
So the generation that lived through lynchings and segregation and Jim Crow and voter suppression and all of that would most definitely, I think, including Louis Armstrong, cry out about the fact that it seems we're going backwards. So that's what I'll share right now. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. I'm just talk about Louis Armstrong as a musician, a trumpet player. We can start with the 19th century tradition of a musician from Philadelphia named Francis Johnson. Had a band. Was born in 1792 or somewhere thereabouts. Died in 1844. Took a trip to Europe during the era of slavery with a band. Played. Received a special silver cornet from the Queen. Came back and brought the concept of promenade concerts to Philadelphia. Had a summer season in Saratoga, was a teacher, was a fiddler, was one of the most published earliest American composers. As he was dying, the minstrel shows started to come in. The Kendall brothers followed him as great cornetists. It was said that Francis Johnson could make his trumpet shout on one of his songs, "Fire, fire," and it would drive the audiences crazy. So they'd be playing a piece that he wrote, and it was something about the fire department coming, and all of a sudden someone with a cornet was making the sound fire come out of a horn. The school of American cornet playing in the 19th century, the lineage loosely went from him, from Francis Johnson, to the Kendall brothers. The Kendall brothers, who were white, were brought to Francis Johnson, who was black. I said, "Can these boys play?" Francis Johnson said, "Yeah, they can play." Ned Kendall. Patrick Gilmore followed the Kendalls. Patrick Gilmore's band was in New Orleans. After the Civil War, General Butler brought him to aggravate the white Southerners. He had various types of bands. At some point, Patrick Gilmore had an integrated band. He was also a cornetist. And he had an element of activism to his bands and to his music. In the 19th century, concerts consisted of arias, marches, quadrilles, different types of dances. One thing that the highlight of a show would be a cornet soloist. Somebody would come up and play things like the Carnival of Venice is an example that maybe some people would know today. That one person would stand up and do many different variations of one thing. So you get a simple theme, do beep, beep, bop, 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 bop. Then you make it sound like two cornets. Then you triple tongue. Then you do fantastic slurs, or you do some type of beautiful rendition that was extremely lyrical. So in one person, you could see how many different techniques could be applied to the same theme. So let's think of the 19th century rolling on, and people's virtuosity is connected to their ability to execute different techniques on a theme that you can identify. Now we go on into the latter part of the 19th century. We start to have John Philip Sousa's famous band. It played ragtime pieces and played marches and played one-steps. Then you get the innovation of Buddy Bolden, which was that I can play the cornet, I play a lead instrument, but I can play like people sing in church. And with that, bless you, playing like people in church comes hollering, shouting, doing all the things that come when the spirit of holiness gets you. But I can also play the blues in the most low-down fashion, and that comes with all the purring and meowing and stuff that's no longer, you can't talk about it unless it's a commercial product today. I can do all of that also on my horn. Buddy Bolden was known to make his horn shout, holler, cry, whisper. He could play hot, he could play sweet. It's the same thing we saw in the 19th century. After Buddy Bolden, there were 3 trumpet players. There were many more, but 3 probably the most famous, and each represented a different aspect of Buddy Bolden's personality, or a different aspect of the cornet person. One was Freddie Keppert, who was a Creole. People from New Orleans know Creoles don't like dark-skinned blacks. At this time, it's different. By the time my generation came along, it was changing, but certainly in that era, it was definitely true. Freddie Keppert could play loud, and he played with a great deal of harmonic sophistication because of the nature of ragtime. Ragtime is like march music. It has different type of harmonic progressions, but above all, it has 4 strains. So if you're memorizing playing music, you have to know how to play 4 distinctly different harmonic progressions in the course of one song. So you have Freddie Keppert, who played a Creole kind of way of playing that was very loud. He could make the trumpet laugh and do different sounds. That even now, you have Freddie Keppert, certain recordings, you think, man, is there somebody laughing? It's Freddie Keppert. Then you have Buddy Petit, who played a lot of diminished chords and represented that type of, also from the Creole school. You had the follower of Buddy Bolden is King Oliver. King Oliver is Louis Armstrong's mentor. King Oliver was a man with a great deal of dignity. He was given to saying things that were very insightful, like jazz was a cause, like the common man or liberal politics. He had an understanding. He was known to be funny and be able to tease people and make fun of them. And he would say stuff like, you have a head on you, so as a mug of beer. So he was that type of, Louis Armstrong learned more from him than any other musician by his own reckoning. The main thing he learned from King Oliver was how to play with the type of human dignity and feeling. And then King Oliver also could make the trumpet sound like a baby crying and could do different variations. Then there was Bunk Johnson. Bunk's a little older than Louis, played with a real smoky sound, like what we would say Miles Davis played with. He had a deep kind of blues quality to his playing, and he was able to play very short, profound ideas. Louis Armstrong combined all of these trumpet players into one style. So he was a great consolidator. Not only did he address the style of these trumpet players, he also realized the best parts of the bravura trumpet of the 19th century. So that means he could play really high with a great deal of power. He could play fanfares. The famous West End blues trumpet solo is a basic fanfare, which is the thing all trumpet players have done since we played leg bones. He could play with unbelievable harmonic sophistication. Now, let's talk about the one thing that separates Louis Armstrong from so many musicians. It's the incredible level of harmonic accuracy. Boy, you can listen to Louis Armstrong on songs he knows, songs he does not know. He's sitting in with bands. He can hear a chord progression better than anyone you've ever. That's why he has nothing in common with hip-hop people. That single reason. You want to know what Louis Armstrong is to a musician? Unbelievable accuracy. How is he pertinent today? When you look at something, when you read it, when you study it, be accurate. Let's talk about him first, the humility of the man. From the time Louis Armstrong was a kid, everyone that encountered him told him he was great. He was singing in a quartet with no shoes on. And Sidney Bechet said, someone said, come listen to this boy play high society clarinet part on the cornet. So that's very difficult to play on a cornet, even for a cornet virtuoso. He could play it as a boy. He was the lead in the vocal quartet with the sweetest voice. He had perfect pitch. You can listen to record after record of Louis Armstrong. No band comes in, nobody comes in, boom, he sings the first note, perfectly in tune. He played second cornet in King Oliver's band. The second voice plays under the lead voice and is a very difficult internal harmony part as songs go on. You're not singing the melody, you're harmonizing it. If you just study Louis Armstrong's alto part, you have to just laugh. The accuracy of that part, the way he improvised the part to another person who was improvising is one of the marvels of all Western music. Yes, Bach improvising was a genius, but there was nobody playing viola with him that was a genius playing a viola part. I'll guarantee you that did not happen. Louis Armstrong knew King Oliver's style so well and was such a student of King Oliver that he could improvise breaks that King Oliver was about to play. He could improvise an accompanying harmonic part to a melodic part that was being played. So let's just come to grips with who the man was as a musician. Sociology is fun to talk about. And we can get into what somebody's political views or they decide to cuss somebody out, whether they did this and that. You know, you can cuss somebody out and have a good time and talk, but not be able to play the trumpet at all.
Right.
You have a much better chance of having the heart and the courage to cuss somebody out or tell somebody you don't like something or speak something that you have a much better chance than you ever playing a second cornet part to somebody improvising. You have almost no chance of doing that and sounding good. This man did that every night before he was 22 years old. Now let's talk about when he started to solo. Whew. Man. Now what are you hearing when you hear him? You hear somebody who can sing arias like Caruso. You hear somebody who understands 19th century harmony like an Italian composer like Verdi. You understand someone who can play march forms, which he grew up playing, like everything that comes out of marches, which ragtime pieces are marches, who could play on sophisticated ragtime pieces like Maple Leaf Rag and things with a lot of complicated harmonies and play with unbelievable accuracy and no music at all. You had someone who could play in the upper register better than any trumpet player you ever heard, who could play in the lower register with a really shallow mouthpiece, which is almost impossible, with a gravitas and a depth of sound and feeling that is still to this day unequaled. You had someone with an unbelievable degree of endurance, could hit one note after another, and then someone whose sound was so personal it didn't even sound like the instrument he was playing. You had a person who could, from memory, play a body of material that, if you listen to Jelly Roll Martin's Library of Congress recordings, and you think Jelly Roll sat down and just played 200 and something examples with not a stretch of music, you get an understanding of the depth of Louis Armstrong's on-the-fly knowledge of music. That person now begins to improvise and make up melodies with the depth and feeling of the oldest sister in the church who sat in the back, of someone who understood the music of the Fifth Jubilee Singers and could sing with absolute authority and authenticity with the same feeling of someone who could have been in a field in 1835, who could sing a hymn or something that required a type of religious fervor that you could not fake, and could do that better than the people in the church who had that experience, who could play cornet solos like a cornet soloist, who played in gazebos all around America playing variations on Carnival of Venice, the theme from Norma, so on and so forth, who had the courage to stand out in front of people with his instrument. Because let me tell you something, it's not the easiest thing in the world to walk out on a stage with an instrument. I was talking with Condoleezza Rice once, and she said, she's a concert pianist, and she said, whenever I have to do a really big speech, when I'm walking on the stage, I always say to myself, thank the good Lord I don't have to play the piano. The courage of Louis Armstrong,
Right.
armed with himself, to stand in front of audiences all over the world through the 1920s and 30s, to play with that degree of absolute accuracy, authority, to sing, to play, to invent new melodies on the fly, to play with rhythm sections he never played with, to play high notes, low notes, soft melodies, sweet melodies, things that came from the church, things that came from homes of ill repute and houses of ill repute and people of ill repute that he knew also intimately, the range of him as a man and what he knew in his experience, and was able to go from the angel to the devil in 2 notes. And then that he could do that on recordings, and people all over the world could hear him and understand this is who we're hearing. There was no doubt to people who heard Louis Armstrong who he was. There was no doubt to musicians when he was 13 years old who he was. King Oliver knew. When Louis Armstrong was 16, they knew, listen to this boy play. His wife, who was the one who said, you don't need to be behind King Oliver, you need to be doing your thing.
Right.
She understood. So he continued on in his career. He did many things. But above all, what he did was he was productive.
Yeah.
And it's difficult to remain productive, even though you're constantly being redefined by those who have no idea who you are, who are willing to reduce you in a second to something so far beneath who you are, be you black or white. When you're on a certain level, you're alone. And this man was on such an unbelievably high level. I wish I could You could lie about what the man could do, and it still would be less than who he actually was on his horn. And this is something I feel absolutely qualified to talk about. I'm going to conclude just by telling 2 stories about who the man was, because I could go on and on and on about his musicianship and give you example after example of recording after recording, and it's all clear about who he was. It's well documented, his playing. Doc Cheatham once told me in Chicago in the 1920s, he had the chance to sub for Louis Armstrong. They were playing in the Vendome, I think it was. He told me this story himself. He said, so Pops couldn't make a gig. And then Louis Armstrong was 26, 27 years old, 25 in there. And Doc was, 26, around the same age. They were friends. And he said the people knew. He went in to play the show. He looked at the show. He saw Pops play. And he of course, had gone to the show. Everybody was on fire about this guy playing trumpet. It's unbelievable. It's playing. He said when Louis Armstrong would go to play his solo, all the people would stand up because here he comes, here he comes. He was like a new thing, like how people look at the new cell phone now. They were looking at him like that. And he said when he subbed for Pops, he got ready for the solo. He said he started playing. Everybody was standing up. And he said by the time he got to his 4th note, everybody was sitting down. That's how, so we started to laugh about it. But that's how definitive Louis Armstrong's emotion and spirit was, because the horn and the music is nothing but spirit.
Right.
And what makes Louis Armstrong different from someone who is anguished about their social condition, or someone who may be right about how they've been disrespected, Louis Armstrong felt he was above whatever that was he was talking about, and he was healing you. He wasn't telling you, you need to know how wrong y'all treated us, even though you probably did know that. He was telling you, even though this is what happened, let me give you something to help you, because this hurt you as much as it hurt me, if not worse. I have to always make the point about injustice. If I'm a man who comes home and beats my wife and my kids, slaps my kids and my children around, if I go into my neighborhood and kick everybody I can kick and stomp them and take their money out of their pocket and abuse them, how do I feel about myself? Do I feel good about that? Am I a hero? Now, the same thing that applies to a single person also applies to a mass of people and to a nation. Louis Armstrong was here to heal this nation. That's why he played with musicians of all races from the beginning of the time that he could do it. He was never underneath anyone who touched a musical instrument. And no one with an instrument that stood within a foot of Louis Armstrong ever felt superior. That's a guarantee, because we're musicians and we understand about music. And that's something that comes from the creator that you have to work on. Dizzy Gillespie once told me, man, I made sure I got a crib 2 blocks from Louis Armstrong. I said, what? Man, you Dizzy. He said, man, that's Louis Armstrong. He said, I would go to this man's house every day if I could, because I knew something like that would never happen again. Orville Shaw, when he knew he was going to pass away, he called me. He said, hey, man, come to my house. I want to rap with you about Louis Armstrong, because I want you to understand really who this man is. And when you have a chance to tell people, you tell them how this man was treated in the world. He was treated unlike any person you can imagine. The love people showed him, the way they stopped him in the street, it wasn't like fans of all ages. It wasn't like, oh, let's rub Louis Armstrong's head because he's our favorite Uncle Tom. See, when you were in the presence of this man, you understood the spiritual majesty that was in him, and you responded to him accordingly. He said that they were going into East Germany, back when it was East Germany. Everybody was on the bus getting high. And the bus driver didn't tell them they're coming up to a checkpoint. Man, all of a sudden they're up on this checkpoint. They're putting weed out, stomping and trying to get roach clips out the window and throwing it. It's too late. They're like, damn. Pops always sat in the back. One guard came on with a dog. And he was, the guard looked into it and walked and he walked off. They were all like, damn. He came back with 7 guards. He said, man, we were like, oh, Lord. The dogs came on the bus and the guards came on. The guards went in the back where Louis Armstrong was. And the first guard looked at him and said, Louis Armstrong. They started jumping up and down. Louis Armstrong, Louis Armstrong, Louis Armstrong. He said they had some version of a camera, Polaroid camera or something. He said, let's get some pictures with Louis Armstrong. I was once driving through the middle of Brazil. Lord knows what road it was on, and some people were doing construction. We were on our bus playing music in the middle of the day. It was literally in the middle of nowhere. We stopped because of the construction, and we started playing out the window to the guys working on the construction. They stopped working on the construction, and we played and could not possibly speak the same language. And one of the guys looked at us and said, Louis Armstrong. So I'm going to conclude, because I'm sorry for taking so long, but
Take your time.
Louis Armstrong was a man who, McCoy Tyner told me, I'm going to conclude with this one story. McCoy Tyner and Elvin Jones, on 2 different occasions, told me that Louis Armstrong came to hear Coltrane's band in the 1960s when they was doing their thing. Okay, they was into. So he said Louis Armstrong, while they were playing, the club took on a vibe. Like something different is in this club. He said people start. So Louis Armstrong was in the club. John Coltrane stopped playing. After the song finished, and Coltrane didn't like to talk, got on the microphone and started to talk about who Louis Armstrong was. Then left the bandstand and went to greet Louis Armstrong and show him the respect that his musicianship and his depth as a human being merited and deserved. He said, then people started to get up. And McCoy said, man, we have that man all wrong. That man was a king.
Yeah.
And that's who this man was. And that's what he represented around the world. Politics of America, the politics is what remains. Just this morning, I put on that 1947 town hall concert. Anyone who wants to know about Pops, that's a great dividing line in his career. His playing and his singing is unbelievable, and it remains that way. And don't think that it has anything to do with an era. I'm not trying to there's nobody in all of Motown that even comes close to approaching the greatness of Louis Armstrong as a musician.
No.
Just like if I was talking about Bach, I could tell you with extreme confidence, if you're trying to write counterpoint, you are not competitive with him. Study him, and you may perhaps learn how to write counterpoint. I don't care how many centuries pass, that will remain true, as it is true about Shakespeare and something about human beings and what makes us so crazy, absurd, and wonderful. He understood those things. Louis Armstrong taught the world how to be more profoundly and directly human, and he is still very pertinent. There is not a person in hip-hop who knows that. Not a single person in American arts of today who's anywhere near approaching the level of Louis Armstrong. Trust me, it's not because I'm a trumpet player. It's just who the man was. And also, there is no person that's treated like him. Because when you encountered this man, you were better than before you encountered him. And that's just what
Greatest of all time.
I just Pops. Yeah, no question about that.
I want to dedicate what I'm getting ready to say to you. You know, it's an unusual thing to experience someone who knows an area in such deep and rich tapestry, but who loves it. It's a remarkable experience to meet a genius who loves the thing he's a genius in. Thank you very much.
That's right.
Can I just say one thing? Okay, there's a tear in this man's eye, and has been since the moment he started talking. Maybe you can't see it because
I love the
the glasses are obscuring it. But I want to just say one thing. I met this man 25 years ago, and we were at the station. But no, it was before then. I was introducing him, and I made the mistake because I was trying to make connection. My people grew up in East St. Louis with Miles Davis. I made the mistake of putting Miles Davis in the same comparison with Louis Armstrong. And as you see, I did not leave with a good impression.
But no, even Miles said there's a great picture of Miles with Louis Armstrong. But Miles was looking at Louis Armstrong like, damn, Louis Armstrong. I mean, that's how we looked at him.
Yeah.
But anyway,
Go ahead,
I know-
please.
You know, I'm tearing up too because I love the Reverend. I just
Yes.
want to say it. I love this man so much, and you know, to sit next to him, it's such an honor. He's been such a blessing on this country, but on this city. So I just, that's why, you know.
All right. Okay. I want to talk about Louis Armstrong's spirituality. But I'm also talking about the spirituality of jazz.
Talk about it.
And I want to talk about how what you have done, and when I pass 59th Street, Columbus Circle, and see jazz
Amen.
at Lincoln Center. See, you think you are a musician, but you're also, in a more profound sense, a minister.
Talk.
See, and Armstrong, you just said it,
Oh, yeah.
was a minister.
Yes, he was.
Yeah, that's right.
Sir, he was that.
Mahalia Jackson,
Uh-oh. Crescent City.
it was
New Orleans.
It was in 19 at the Jazz Fest.
That's right. Just 71 or 72.
Yeah.
You talking with Pops in Newport.
And,
70s.
and you need to understand how surprising it was that she agreed to join him
Right,
on
right.
the set.
Right.
Because Mahalia Jackson, like so many other people in my community, had developed this sense of the difference between secular and sacred music. And her attitude was, you can't play the Lord's music and also the other music, as if there is the Lord's music and then there is the other music. So Louis Armstrong wanted her to join up with him. She said, no, I can't do both of these. I do the Lord's music, I do gospel music. I can't do the other music.
In the Rhodes Gospel Tent.
But she agreed at long last to join, and the music that they did together was just a closer walk with thee.
Right.
Now, for some people, that was just like a church piece that they were jazzing up a little bit, and Mahalia was trying to pull it in the gospel direction, etc. What I want to talk to you about today is
Tell us about it.
what I want to talk to you about is that Louis Armstrong was not just a jazz man. Louis Armstrong, and the title of my presentation is Jazzing Our Way Toward a Wonderful World.
Okay. Yes, sir.
Louis Armstrong was a gift from God to the culture.
Yes, he was.
But most people have tended not to extract the grace note that he was within the musical world.
That's right.
So let me just talk a little bit about that. What can I say about Armstrong's spirituality? And I think it's different than most people's because you jazz musicians tend not to be very religious, traditionally.
Talk about it. Talk about it, Reverend. you explaining something.
So out of my little.
Step back. You explaining it. I gotta reach over here.
No, you're gonna agree with me that if you try to describe what the spirituality of Louis Armstrong was like, you might find this definition to be at least approximately true. Pondering spirituality, I mean to include all there is of me, my body, mind, spirit, and emotions, both public worship and private devotions, my values and habits, hopes and desires, what makes me strong and what inspires. I think of the powers I cannot see and how they help shape my destiny. I think of what brings me joy and peace. When burdened, bewildered, what gives me release? I think of my place in my family and the spirit that builds up community. And I wonder if earth is glad I'm here. Am I spreading love or stirring up fear? I try to discern if there's more for me right here where I am or beyond the sea. When I'm in the Spirit, these words come through. You are so precious. I'm glad I made you. Now, traditionally, I'm not sure he would have considered himself in that traditional religious sense spiritual. But in this definition, I think he could find a resting place. You know, how could he consider himself religious? You know, the pot stuff, the women stuff, the wild stuff, all of that stuff. But he nevertheless understood, pot notwithstanding, all the ladies notwithstanding, the language he could use when he got salted, notwithstanding, that he and the Lord had a thing going on,
No question.
and it wasn't the kind you could talk about,
No question about
but that God understood it, and they understood it, that they had an intimate relationship, and when he played Just a Closer Walk to Thee, with thee, he was talking about sustaining the integrity of that unique relationship that he had with the ultimate reality. Okay. Now, that's what I think about that. But there's something else. There's something else about this jazz, and this is really what I want to be talking to you about. Let me get my notes here together. He was an apostle.
Yes, he was.
By apostle, we mean sent.
Yes.
He felt like, in some way, he was sent to the world as it is, and that God and he and the gang he worked with were going to make it better, no matter how bad it was. Now, my belief is that if I had preached his funeral, I would have preached from Romans 8:28. Louis Armstrong had seen the worst of the worst. I mean, in his house. The ladies of the street that he played for late at night after it was all over. The crooks that he worked with. The folks that protected him. That man had seen the worst of the worst. But he was convinced that God had a way of working with the worst to bring out that which was better than the worst had appeared to be. So Romans 8:28 says, for we know that God, that everything works together for good to those who love the Lord and to those who are called according to God's purpose. I think, and this is based on all the reading I've done, trying to get ready for this little piece I'm going to say. I think the brother believed that God was an expert in bringing something good out of mess.
That's right.
Yes, sir.
That'll preach.
Yes, sir.
This is why backstage, they said when you met with him, he had all these people. Number one, he's in his shorts, got a towel over him, handkerchief on his head, towel over his shoulder. But in the room, he would have a couple of nuns, a couple of prostitutes, a couple of rabbis. I mean, you name it, he had it in there, and he introduced them. And he acted like, in the sight of God, each of these persons was to be respected as a full member of the family of God, and there was no big U's and no little I's. They were all God's children and need to be respected just like he respected. If they had a job, that's good. If they didn't have one, like Clarence, his little adopted child didn't have one, that's all right. That his circumstances had to be responded to with respectfulness. Now let me close out by telling you why I want to dedicate everything I'm saying to you, Mr. Wynton Marsalis. You guys, when you get on the set, McLuhan says the medium is the message. It's not even just what you're playing, it's the dynamic of your relationship in producing this piece.
Talk about it.
And my thinking is that for Louis Armstrong, if he had been asked what is his concept of God, I think he would have said, well, sort of like, I think God is ultimate relationality.
No, that's heavy.
Now, here's what I think. Looking at what you guys do on the set, I think we have the action that you ask about. In this world that we are in, divided, the absence of any commitment to the common good, ultra-narcissistic world we are in, a world where we are messed over, where there is the absence, where there is sanctioned absence of morality. Here's what you guys do that is sacred. Now, I know you guys, these jazz guys, in fact, the only thing that's different about you, look like you fairly normal guy. Most jazz guys got some stories, man, some heartaches. I know you can't play jazz like, you can't play the blues like you can't do what you do without having had some hurting places. But you probably one of the least likely advertising of the horror of the life that has led you to the sweetness of your blues. But anyway, this is what I see in jazz. And this is why my answer to you about the action. If we could help make our society function sort of like a jazz set, we'd be better off as a world. And here are the things. Number one is jazz players seem to recognize what the Africans taught us, not what Mahalia Jackson had thought about sacred versus the secular. Jazz players seem to know I am because we are. I don't care how good you are. The African proverb, I am because we are. Secondly, the jazz players have to be able to listen to one another and blend with one another, or if it's going to be dissonance, it has to be intentional dissonance.
Yep.
On the way to a resolution of the dissonance. Anyway, listening. That we have a society that's hard of hearing of each other. Thirdly, we must listen not only to each other, but a jazz player has to listen to his mind and his soul to discover the improvisational possibilities. You got to listen to your mind and your soul. Listening to others, but your mind and your soul. Fourthly, a jazz player, so far as I can see, because sometimes some of them make mistakes.
Not Louis Armstrong.
Not Louis Armstrong didn't. Yes. But I tell you what, you got to be committed to find the better way from here. Ain't no need of arguing with here. You got to find a better way from here. So you got to accept what's given to you, but you got to find a better way. Also, you got to allow yourself to be inspired by others. You know, you got to let it happen to you. You can't say, no, he's doing his thing. I ain't going to let that touch me. No, you got to allow yourself to be inspired by others. Also, you have to be prompted to transform and transcend. What you're given, whatever the melody is, whatever's going down, a jazz player is trying to go one better. Just go one better. Also, in order to do this, a jazz player has to sustain a work ethics and practice towards excellence. You can't be a shabby jazz player and be welcomed on the set. They got to know you've done what you're supposed to do to be able to ride in your own lane. You got to handle your lane. You can't be all, you got to handle your lane. But a jazz player wishes not only to handle his or her own lane, but wishes the other to excel in their lane. I don't know a jazz player that's hoping somebody gonna mess up unless they kind of sick. If they kind of sick, hoping somebody gonna mess up. And also, I think a jazz player has always to promote the optimal interplay between the members of the ensemble. Now, let me finally say what I've got to say, because I'm looking at our time here.
Can I take a picture of that?
Yes, you got it. You got it.
I'm sorry, y'all.
Let me tell you. You want me to tell you about Louis Armstrong? When I read up on him, the thing that lingered with me is the best way to describe who he was for us comes out of the story of When All Africans Can Fly by Langston Hughes and Arnold Bontemps. Y'all know the story? There was a time when all Africans could fly, but due to the loss of respect to the Great Spirit, we lost the capacity to fly. Now, there was an island, John's Island, where slaves had to be brought into the plantation all the time. One time, a group of new Africans were brought on, and included was a woman who had just had a baby a few days before. She put her baby on her back and tried to work, but the sun was too hot for her. The driver came over when she fell down and slapped at her. She got up, and she turned to an old man. I'm making Armstrong the old man. And she said to him, "Father, is it time?" And he said, "No, not now." Then she worked some more, but fell once more. And the driver came and slashed at her. And she asked, "Father, is it time?" And he said, "Yes, my daughter, now it is time." And he said some words. And she flew off into the ridge of the horizon. Then other Africans started asking, "Is it time?" And he said, "Yes." And they flew. The driver, the owner, and the overseer said, "Get that black devil. He's causing us to lose all our slaves." But you know what he said to the others? He said to the other slaves, "Coolie bar, coolie bar." And they all flew off into the ridge of the horizon. Now, here's the way I look at it. Louis Armstrong was the old man that God gave us, and he was a young, I don't mean chronological. He was the old man that felt like God had sent him.
Right.
And he's different than that story. You see, because the story is about telling African slaves, yes, now it is time. Louis Armstrong rose above ethnic particularity.
Yes,
And everywhere he went,
Talk about it.
he thought it was time to say to black folks,
Yes.
white folks,
That's right.
Jewish folks,
Amen.
African natives,
Yes, sir.
anybody,
Talk about it.
even the pimps.
Yes, he did.
Whenever he was there,
Yes.
he was trying to say, "Coolie bar."
Yes, he was.
Coolie bar, what does that mean? Let them go up on high. This is why I think Louis Armstrong was an apostle.
Yeah.
He was sent to promote happiness and wholeness and freedom
Yes, sir.
for all of us.
Yes, he did.
And he was prepared to use everything he had to get that job done. If it's a handkerchief on his head, bring it on. If it's a towel around his back, bring it on. It doesn't matter what the music was. He was convinced that his job was to make people happy in the name of the Lord. And no matter how bleak circumstances were, he felt like he had the power at the end of his horn or at that gravelly voice to be a creator of new situations. What a wonderful world was made popular in the year that Dr. King was assassinated. And there was a whole lot of evil going on all around the world. But Louis Armstrong felt like if I can keep blowing, if I can keep singing, and if I can help people fulfill their destiny and to be free, then it looks awful. But guess what? He could see like a prophet, a seer. He could see the wonderful aspect. Now, finally, thing about him, they didn't like his grin. But in my looking over his pictures in these last weeks of preparation, I think that his grin was always riding on top of a grimace.
Oh, that's why it's so sweet.
The mask.
That's like
The
put
mask.
some salt on your tongue before you put some sugar on it. You put some salt on your tongue before you put some sugar on it. It's gonna be sweeter.
He was the truth.
Yes, sir. He was.
And his music was the truth.
Yes, it was.
And you,
I'm glad to testify.
you in establishing the institution that keeps this alive. If the world could be more like a jazz set, we might survive the mess we're in.
Amen.
And rise to a new future.
Yes, sir.
Thank you for what you've done.
Amen. Hey, I felt like I was on the bandstand just now. Oh, that was great, fantastic.
What more did you need? What more do you need to say?
There's nothing else to be
mean-
said. That's it. You covered it. It's in there. There it is. That's it. He covered it.
I feel like we need to say first, let the church say amen.
Amen. Amen. That's
So they have a wonderful
right.
testimony all the way down the line. And I have to recover from just the excitement and the thrill of having the truth come thick and fast and beautifully in this way. And one thought comes to mind as a way of following up. One of the words that came up that was a surprise to me, came from Winston, was the word, I mentioned it, and then you picked up on humility as something that Armstrong had. And you talked about courage, something that he had. And I wonder if you could say another word about humility, or if other people might want to pick up on that part.
Man, I'm not gonna. The Reverend.
Yeah.
If we just write down what he said,
Right.
I'm really serious. If we just, he touched on so many fundamental truths in such a profound, direct way. I really have absolutely nothing else to say except thank you.
Yes.
Just adjust it.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, you know, he covered it.
And maybe what we can say is, if people in the audience have things they want to say, or or questions that they want to pose, this would be your moment. In the back.
Amen.
Okay, there we go. There's a question up here in the front. Just wait for the mic, please.
Now you're gonna build on it.
Thank you. Well, just to build on what
you were saying, Reverend, about Louis understanding that he was sent here. In 1959, he's on tour in Italy. And when he suffers a heart attack in the town of Spoleto, he has to spend a few weeks in hospital. And when he gets out, he jokes with the Italian newspaper reporters saying that, oh, yeah, Gabriel was trying to get me to audition to play second chair for the band in heaven, and I turned him down this time. And everybody understood it as a joke. I doubt he did mean it just as a joke. And I'd bet anything that right now he is improvising the second trumpet part to Gabriel. And that was his plan all along. I mean, fair point. Maybe Gabriel's improvising second to him, but...
I don't know, Gabrielle can play, but I don't know if she will mess with him.
So, just wanted to share that with you.
Yes, thank
So.
you, thank you.
Are there other comments or questions that people might want to raise? Or,
now that Gabriel was brought up, talk about, please, if you would. I know jazz musicians who play certain instruments like to think that their instrument is like the instrument. But I think when we look at jazz, the trumpet has a pretty good argument for it being, particularly with pops. But actually, if you could talk about the metaphor of the trumpet from Gabriel on up, what is it about the trumpet, man?
Well, Gabriel is a woman. In the mythology, the archangel is actually female. And this the elephant trumpets blew down the wall of Jericho. I always mess with the saxophone players. I say trumpet in the Bible. No, I'm probably talking about a saxophone. There's no piano in the Bible. And our metaphor, we just herald instrument. We call. You know, we proud of it. We brash, arrogant. You're trumpet players, hard-headed. So that's our. But the drum in our music too is the trumpet and the drums are together. So the first depiction of the trumpet and drums, some Egyptian vase has trumpet players and drummers. Beethoven, Haydn Symphony, the kettle drum play with the trumpet. Trumpet players, if you're a big band and you lose the drum part, you give them the lead trumpet part. And they use that as a drum part. And it's just those two instruments. Yeah, we leg bone, elephant, you know, trumpet. Yeah, I don't want to say nothing, man. I feel my man put so much on my mind. I'm trying.
And he's still crying.
You know what I'm saying? No, I was in Brazil.
He's still crying,
he
everybody.
hit me because I needed to hear it. I was in Brazil with a guy, and he was translating for me. So at a certain point, me and the guy who I was translating with, an unbelievable musician named Hamilton de Holanda, we hugged each other. And then the guy who was translating, we went to say something else, and the guy who was translating left. I said, wait a second, man. He said, man, y'all hug, man. That's enough. y'all said love and you hug. I'm going home. Ain't nothing else to be said. You know.
Could you tell about the time?
Yes.
Could you tell about the time where you were performing with or practicing with Kathleen Battle, and you hadn't heard the sermon in a while, and you asked this gentleman to improvise the sermon?
Man, I mean, he has had such integrity for such a long time and has represented for so many people and is truly what a man of the word is. And his career and what he has done to minister to so many people has been so clear for such a long time. I feel fraudulent speaking on him. I mean, the fact, and look, I'm sitting next to him, and it's a thing we say in jazz where you can be in the first row is not close enough than being on the bandstand. Because when you're on the stand, it's like, it's the intensity. If you could just feel, excuse me.
That's all right.
But just the feeling that was coming out of him, yeah, you know, but it was tonight was, whew. That was one of them ones. We got that on film somewhere. I got to get a tape of that. I'm not going to sell it, Reverend.
and maybe it would be helpful. Reverend Forbes came and spoke to our faculty one year. We had a session on the preacher as an improviser. Right. And there's a way of turning around what Reverend Forbes said today. If the jazz musician at his or her best is a preacher and a witness, an apostle, then the preacher in a certain tradition as an improviser too. He told our congregation that as a young man just out of seminary, he came back home to North Carolina to preach them now an academic sermon and show them some stuff from school. And he preached hard. And he said it was the longest time without an amen in that church, maybe for many years. And he asked his father, who was a great preacher, who had gotten wonderful responses Sunday after Sunday, if he had any advice for him. And he said, son, you didn't get an amen because you didn't leave space for an amen. And then he talked to our group about those spaces and leaving room for the congregation to say amen, or to say well, or to say And in other words, your sermon is a group production, and you leave room for the Spirit to come in and maybe take you in a direction that you did not expect to go in. And there you are then, as the improviser, carried along by the community and carried along by your own commitment and your own studies and your own spirit in a way that I never forgot. Oh.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
I think are we done?
Thank you.
I think it's time to just say thanks to this wonderful group
Yes, indeed.
and to praise God, if we can do that in a secular house, for the wonder of these people in front of us, and have a good trip home.
Yes. Amen.
Sing something. I'm not going to be able to sing anything.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Keep talking.
Keep us doing what you're doing down there, and we can extract from it the sociology of musicality and the spirituality.
We have one more round of applause for our